Welcome to our program, Coach-to-Coach. Today's guest is Marie Arymar. Marie is a certified clarity coach, sharing principles behind clarity and making a real difference in every client's life. Marie works with parents and younger people, both privately and through schools, organizations, and charities. You can learn more about Marie's work on her website, realizationworks.com. And that's with an S, not with a Z, if you're not in North America. And thank you for joining us today, Marie. It's so nice to be here with you.
Oh, thank you, Greg. It's my absolute pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here.
So the way I love to start these off is to ask what first sparked your interest in coaching?
Yeah, it's such a great opening question. So my background has been in education, 16 to 19-year-olds, that's further education in the UK. And in a college of 3,500 students, I was the head of pastoral support. So I looked after 140 personal tutors, 12 senior tutors, attendants, UCAS, university applicants, everything to do with the young people that wasn't academic. And so if you can imagine, that my team, we were constantly in one-to-ones with young people, and it was something that I really thrived in. And the young people, there was an affinity, it just seemed to work. And the age group of 16 to 19, or even younger actually, but it's a beautiful age group. It's very exciting. There's a lot. It's challenging and alarming for some of them, but it's an exciting time. And unfortunately, I left that place. I moved on to other colleges, and unfortunately, in the UK, further education was the hardest hit of all the education sectors in the austerity cuts. So college counsellors went first, and then a lot of pastoral teams got made redundant. So I found myself redundant, and that was strange. It was okay, but it was strange. I went off and did some work at the university in Exeter in Devon, where I live in the UK, but it wasn't for me. And I thought, my calling is to be doing that one-to-one work with young people. And it wasn't to be a counsellor, the normal route of counselling therapy. I had started on that route, and I wanted that informal, two-way, easy conversation where some great insights happen. And so I just went for it. I was in a position where I could go for it, and I just went for it. And I'm really, really glad I did. That was 2016. Yeah.
I suppose with all those cuts, it's left a gaping hole in the communities in terms of a need that those kids have. So
it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because you can really focus on what happens in the classroom, but there's a whole lot of stuff going on outside of the classroom, and that's what I'm working with now, and that impacts the classroom a lot. Yeah.
You've already kind of preluded into the next question, so maybe we can peel it back a little more, but tell us more about your business and how you're working and who you're helping.
It was really interesting, the business side of it, because I felt I was just doing something I felt so passionate about. It wasn't work, and therefore, how do I charge? And setting out to be a coach, I did 4 years. So since 2018, I've done 4 solid years of coach training. You said that I was a certified clarity coach, and I've done other training around that. And part of that was understanding what my business would look like, because you want to reach out and help your friends or children, but somehow you need to make that be a business model. And actually it fell into place much more easily than I thought it would, because behind a child who's feeling anxious or feeling challenged, there's often a parent who's feeling anxious and challenged. And when you have that conversation with the parent, who's really the client, you you can see them start to think, okay, maybe there's some hope, maybe this isn't as challenging as I thought it was. And so often I'm working with the young person, but I might be working with the parents. Sometimes I work together. I've got an 80-year-old client at the moment, so I've got a whole range of clients. They don't have to fit into that mold, but if I was asked what my business model is, it really is young people, I would say from 12 up to 18 mostly, have some different ages. And parents, that often just comes along the way.
Yeah.
Really, the focus is on the young people. I also am a podcaster, and I have a podcast series called Precarious Parenting, and that really was for parents. It's for anybody who wants to just listening to other people who feel they've had an incredibly challenging experience, but they've come through it. And that's great to listen to the hope and love and the joy of actually coming through those journeys. So I do that, and I have my book that I think we might talk about a bit later.
Yeah.
So just trying to be something that's offering more than just face-to-face talking.
It's interesting what you said about the child and the parents. And I had a client the other day who has an employee who has a teenage child, and she was talking about possibly having me coach her employee, and she was worried about the anxiety and stress and things that her employee is going through and the impact that's having on her teenage child. So I can see it. I talked about a common metaphor we use in coaching, which is the oxygen mask in the airplane. You got to put your own mask on first before you can help somebody else. So there's this natural kind of like, if the parent can better manage their stress and anxiety, then they're kind of going to model that for the child. I'm just curious if you've seen, in working with the child and them improving in those areas, if you've seen kind of the reverse flow of that, where the parent can actually benefit from the modeling that the child might be doing.
Yeah, well, what strikes me when you say that is the first thing that comes into my head is often when I work with young people, they're often feeling responsible for their parents' well-being. And their parents are feeling responsible for their child's well-being. So everybody's tippy-toeing around on eggshells, trying to be responsible for each other without any real success, because it leads to lack of discussion or assumptions, or so when we can see that one realizes that they can pull back, they don't have to be responsible, that has an impact on the other one by default, which is I think is a really nice thing to be able to see. And I had was talking to somebody recently, and she was telling me that her young child is very anxious, but she said, but I'm really anxious. I have anxiety. It was a thing that she has. She's been diagnosed with it. And she said, so, the thing is, that's just how I am. And it's like, well, okay. And there you are seeing anxiety in your child. So it's, I don't know if that bit quite answers your question, but I really see them as dovetailed.
Yeah. Well, I love that, because it's, in my own experience, like I'm the ultimate picky eater. Like, think of your typical 3-year-old in a 50-year-old body. And I used to always have this story in my head about, well, yeah, my dad and his mom, they were super picky eaters. And then on my mom's side of the family, it was like my grandfather was the most stubborn person you could ever meet. And I kind of combined the stubbornness with the picky eating to create the ultimate picky eater. But it was almost, and then now that I have my own kids, it's like the stories that we tell ourselves, and convince ourselves that, oh yeah, these traits, whether it's picky eating or anxiety or depression or whatever it is like somehow hereditary. Or of course my kid is anxious because I'm anxious all the time. And it really, there isn't, there may be some hereditary things. I don't know. I'm not a professional or a doctor. I say I'm a professional coach, but it's more to do with our psychology and our thinking than it is anything to do with the fact that we can break out of those patterns and those stories.
Well, I think you're right, and I'm just reminded of working with a lad who he got beaten up by 4 people, 4 of his peers, and one of them was a very old friend of his from way back in, like, when they first started school, but now they were at different secondary schools. And so he was beaten up outside his home or near his home by 4 people, of one of whom was a dear friend of his. And he was really, really upset. Obviously, this lad, it was traumatic. And the mum said to me, well, I'm just not letting him out of the house again. And it's like, oh, what? I'm praising, but why? And she said, well, it might happen again. I'm not letting him out again. And this is a lad who's 14, and it's like, okay, that's an approach, but it's an approach based on the parents' feelings of fear and worry and what ifs. And it's based on something very real. Her son was beaten up.
Yeah.
I get that. But is that going to be helpful? Who knows? Possibly not. Who knows? But it's worth exploring.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, what comes up for me in that example is, people don't really often know that, like, they don't have a lot of things to choose from. They just pick the thing they think is the best course of action.
Absolutely.
Obviously, in that case, the I don't necessarily, easy is probably the wrong word for it, but the fastest path to safety is not to go out.
Absolutely.
But you can't really live your life that way. At least that's one thing we've learned in the last 2 years is it's not much of a life when you're trapped in your house for a long time.
Yeah, it's not really getting to the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is this lad wants to understand why his mate did that. And I think not being allowed to leave the house is a way to be safe, for sure. It's a definite planning and preparation step, but as a strategy, but I'm not sure it's actually getting to the nub of how this lad feels about what happened. And of course, that's what we're doing together. Yeah.
Well, I have no doubt you'll get him moved along that road.
Well, his mum messaged me today. I had a session with him yesterday, the second session, and his mum messaged me. She emailed me today and she said he has just slept through the night for the first time. She said he went to bed about an hour after our session, and our session was after school, and he slept through, and she had to wake him up to go to school. So something's shifted for him, that he's actually been able to relax enough to have a very mega sleep. So fingers crossed.
Crossed for sure. Yeah. The healing power of sleep too cannot be underestimated.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. I know, we often talk about what our insight friendly spaces are. And for me, napping is one of mine. And I don't know, I listen to my body as best as I can, like when I'm tired, and I always wake up with a new idea or a new perspective or something. So
I think that the ability to nap, my husband calls it, like power naps, like 10 minutes. It's 10 minutes. It's all I need, power nap. I think it's a life skill. I don't actually have that. Like, he can sleep anywhere. He could probably sleep standing up for 10 minutes. But I do sleep well at night, generally, on the whole, and it is a blessing.
Yeah. You've already given us some examples. I'm just wondering if there's any more examples you'd like to share. Maybe
I did think about one. So the way I work on a monthly basis. So I ask the parent and the young person to commit to a month, and that could be weekly, an hour a week, or it could be fortnightly or twice, and whatever it's all bespoke. But generally that's how I work. And so sometimes they might stay with me, I don't know, say for 3 months, And then they might go down to, say, fortnightly for a couple of months. And then, you know, because I don't want them forever. They don't need me. It's not me here. So, but sometimes I get asked to see somebody once. And I'm kind of like, what do you want me to do in one session? But I wanted to tell you about one that was really lovely. And because sometimes I can be talking to a 50-year-old man and not be able to have a deep conversation. I can talk to a 12-year-old sometimes about spiritual issues, you know, we can go deep. So it just depends on the rapport and the engagement, you know, of whatever's going on between us. And so sometimes somebody will say to me, my child's in crisis, can you do one session? And I'm like, nah, not so much. I don't expect so. Who knows? But I had this one, and this girl is 6, and she and the mum said that when she goes to school, if there's a fire drill, she completely has a meltdown. She's convinced her favorite teddies, her loved ones, they're all going to die in a fire. And it's got to the point where leaving the house, she is like, Mummy, have you turned the oven off? Mummy, go back and check the oven. Are you sure? And the mum was just talking to me, and she wasn't even thinking it was an issue. She was like, is that normal? I'm like, I don't think so. Not really. And so let's just do one session, because she didn't have much money. And actually we bartered, because she wasn't able to afford anything, but she was offering a service that would work for me. So we bartered. And I ended up in this session with this 6-year-old, and then the 3-year-old lad came, and he's on my lap. So I'm trying to do this session with a 3-year-old, like looking at me and putting my hair and playing with my glasses. And you just got to have fun, right? I mean, I know you know that.
Yeah.
And we just, I took a few props, and we just talked about the power of thought and how we don't have to believe it. And I had a bubble, you know, a bubble pot with a stick and you blow. I had one of those, and we had bubbles going everywhere. And we were just playing with the idea that these thoughts aren't permanent, and they can pop, they can pass. We don't have to buy into them anymore. And also we had a conversation. This was like 40 minutes. And we had a conversation about the fact that she isn't responsible. And like her mum and her dad are responsible for the oven being off, not her. I was quite clear about that. Anyway, it was mayhem. It was mayhem, Greg. And there were bubbles everywhere, and this 3-year-old was everywhere, and the 6-year-old was everywhere. And I thought, do you know what? And I started to read her my book, and she said, oh no, don't read me the book. It was too much for her. So I didn't read the book. Anyway, I saw this lady earlier this week. And I said, how's your daughter? And she said, there's been fire drills at school, and she hasn't blinked. She hasn't talked about the oven. And it's like, I don't take credit for that. It's like, she just needed to hear, she didn't need anything, sorry. She was able to hear that it wasn't her responsibility, and she didn't have to believe that anymore. And we just did it in a way that worked for her, age 6. So I just wanted to share that, because it's a lovely, joyful example.
It's interesting, because I've been in, I don't know, hundreds of hours of courses and listening to, you know, audiobooks and podcasts and things. I've never heard that bubble, if you want to call it a metaphor. So I love, like, I've heard clouds and all this thing, but you know, it is such a visual, like it's just, you know,
it's awesome.
One of those things. It's so simple, a 6-year-old could understand it, but it's also so simple, a 50-year-old could understand it. Right?
It's so awesome. And I tell you what, in my bag of tricks, I have got a toy bubble machine. It's like that big. It's plastic. It's loads of different colors, and it's got a white. Is it a white? No, it's a battery. So you press an on button, and just all these bubbles shoot out. It's like a foam machine, but it's a bubble machine. And I've taken that into primary schools before, and it's mayhem, but it's great.
Yeah, Well, it turns the whole thing into fun too, right? Like
Yeah,
it's fun to, I don't know, see a thought and then burst it, um,
yeah,
or let it just float away and burst itself. Like it's,
yeah. Either way is going to happen. You're
yeah,
never going to keep it. You're
yeah,
never going to keep it. And the great thing about that is, children give it to you straight. I started reading her the book. It takes 10 minutes to read. She's like, nah, don't do that. I'm like, okay.
yeah, yeah. It's like that's what's awesome to the kids. Like they're not going to humor you and say, yeah, okay, fine, I can put up with this for 10 minutes. They just say, no, I don't need that or want that right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say that you're going to incorporate carrying a 3-year-old child around into all your sessions. As
Oh
a
my gosh. He was
icebreaker.
amazing. I fell in love with him. He's like a puppy. He's like a Labrador, a golden Labrador puppy. That's what he was if he would be an animal. And I just wanted to take that boy home. And his mum said, yeah, everybody falls in love with him. Yeah, it was great.
It's awesome. I don't know if it's a continuation of the bubble theme, but the next question is, if there's one thing you'd want people to know, what would that be?
Yeah. Well, there's two things really. We already have what we're looking for. I talk a lot about confidence. And this sounds facetious, but it's not. Confidence isn't something that we can order off of Amazon. I've run out. I need a kilo of Amazon of confidence. It's there within us all the time. And I like to think that I get a big torch and I shine it back on that. But the other thing I think is even more important is to parents, and to sort of to know that our children's behavior is not the truth of who they are, because our children can behave in ways that feel so alarming and scary, and we feel like we've lost them, or we can't even recognize them from their behavior, and we kind of and we often fall into judgment about that, about who they are, but it's not who they are. It's not. And that's the message I think I'd love, given that I'm talking about young people and parents. See behavior as something that they're doing because whatever's going on for them, but it's not the truth of who they are. It's who they've always been is the truth of who they are. Loving, caring, beautiful young people.
Love that. I mean, one of the things I've gotten out of the 3 principles has been the whole idea of psychological innocence. And until this conversation, I never really thought about it in terms of how it would apply to children. But probably, even more so, if you think about children are just doing the best they can to get what it is they think they need or want. And often that ends up in bad behavior, because that's the only thing they can make sense of, or solution that they've come up with.
And it's really hard to articulate sometimes. And also sometimes it's really hard to be heard, because it's really interesting that often people talk about young people are like they're a different species to grown-ups. And what I sometimes marvel at is how a young person can go to school all day and come home and we're surprised that they're tired, but they've actually been engaged in a busy, cerebral kind of, and then the social dynamics and trying to fit in, it's hard work, and I think we all get in our own homes, we all get very lost in our own worlds, and taking time to listen to each other. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But we don't often listen without judgments and without assumptions and without comparisons and without criticism. It's all innocent. We don't mean to, but we're often watching our young people through goggles of preconceived ideas, and that's not listening. We don't listen to them, they don't listen to us. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. I often find too, as a parent, our expectations for what our children should be capable of like, can't they control themselves? But you as an adult, you're not controlling yourself in most of those situations either. So it's
Oh, and we forget what we did.
yeah, totally.
You know, can we really say that we haven't done those things? And then there's a whole nother conversation about brain development, and I don't think we give enough credit to what's actually going on in the teenage brain.
Mhm.
And, you know, sometimes they respond with grunts and, you know, that whole kind of fight, flight, freeze, because they're working from a different part of their brain. They're not working from this front bit, which is negotiation and compassion and empathy and communication skills, because it's not developed properly yet.
Yeah.
Huge conversations to be had, Greg.
Yeah, huge. Well, it's interesting. My kids are 16 and 18, so you know, I look back now that I'm into coaching and things at my own parenting over those 18 years, and you know, do a lot of these head slap kind of things. Like, what was I thinking? It's funny you mentioned how you know, how tired kids can be, or like we used to drop my kids off at, you know, before school care at like 7 a.m, because my wife and I both worked, and then they'd have that, then they go to school, then they go to after school care, and we pick them up at 6:30, and it's like, that's a long day for a 6, 7, 8 year old.
Yeah.
And then you wonder why they're a little agitated when they get home.
Yeah. And sleep patterns change. You know, there is all this data that shows that it would be better if they went to sleep later and started school later. But yeah, I think that's been tried. But, you know, I mean, we're all doing the best we can, all of us. You know, nobody's pointing fingers at parents. We're all doing the best we can, moment to moment, with what we've got. And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. Me too. I'm a step parent. You know, I've made some right clangers, and I've done some things that have been supremely helpful in the right moment, as we all have. You know, we can't beat ourselves up for it. I think it's about learning, communicating, and listening above all else. Because I think young people want to be heard, and I don't think they're heard. In class, they're often not heard. They're told to sit, be quiet, sit still. Interesting.
Very well. I was thinking about you before Christmas because I had a session with a client, and he's got 2 kids, 6 and 8, and that's when you came to mind in your book. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about. Do you want to know a secret?
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so it's a little book. It's I call it a toilet book because it takes about 10 minutes to read, and basically, you know, you can toilet book. Sorry, it's a bit crude, but you know, you can pick it up at any stage and read something in it. And it's for sort of, I'd say, 8-year-olds to adults. And I've just tried to give a little bit of calm. And what a lot of young people say is when either they've read it or I might read it to them sometimes in part of a session quite early on. And they often say, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one. And that's a big thing. And I think that's huge. That we all get caught up in thought storms. We all get caught up in our own busy minds. And there is a way through it. We don't have to believe the past. You know, the past is gone, and it's our thinking of it now in relation to what happened back then. And you know, I think it's self-published and it's gone out all over the world, and I'm really enjoying its journey. It's just its journey now. And I hear some really, I mean, people, quite a lot of coaches, this sounds like a sales thing. It's really not, but quite a lot of coaches buy a number of them at a time and give them to their clients. And one coach from America sent me a beautiful picture of a homemade card. And this lad, his parents were in a divorce. The mum was having therapy with this coach. This lad's aunt was terminally ill, and he went to see her in a hospice. She was at end of life. And he did this card, and it was lifted from the sun and the clouds drawing. and saying that, you know, the clouds pass, but the sun is always there. And he gave it to her. And I'm like, yeah, brilliant. That is so cool that he got that and wanted to share that with his dying aunt. I mean, blimey. So, yeah, I'm very proud of it, actually. And the obvious thing to say next is it can be bought on Amazon, but it's actually much cheaper from my website because I have better postage. And if somebody wanted to get more, then I would say contact me and we'll sort it out real-time postage, not, you know, it's yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And what is, you can share your website again, and assuming that's the best way to get in touch with you if people want to learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, it is the best way.
Say the name of your podcast again.
Yeah, so my website is realizationworks.com with an S, not a Z, realizationworks.com, because it does. Realization does work. And actually everything is on there. The podcasts are on there, the books on there. Yeah, the podcast called Precarious Parenting. There's quite a lot of information on there. So yeah, I'd guide people to that, and they can email me via that.
It's funny because I've taken up a practice of going for a long walk every day and listening to podcasts or audiobooks. And when you had Dick and Bettinger on as a guest, that was the first one of your podcasts I'd listened to. And then, of course, as soon as you're in my kind of, I don't know, playlist or whatever other episode, I've listened to a few episodes. And even though I'm beyond that parenting age group, still super helpful. I mean, the things you're pointing to are so universal. And
thank you.
Can help everyone. So,
and I think the podcast series isn't 3 principles based per se. It's kind of 3 principles by stealth. But I'd guide people to Jack Pranksy, Dick Bettinger, and Mavis Khan. They are all beautiful guests, and it just blows you away what they've got to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've loved it. I'm so pleased to be talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. See you again soon.